Good morning or good afternoon. Hey guys, and welcome to another lesson in another great week. This week we're going to move on from the evolution unit to talk about a little bit more about classification and really to dive into the diversity that exists in life. So we've learned how diversity is created through evolution, through natural selection, and through neutral evolution and random mutation. This week, we're going to go ahead and take a look at all the fascinating organisms that are a result of this process and what features that they share that allow us to be able to determine where they fit in our system of classification. So the first question is, how do we actually classify organisms? What do we use? Well, before, when we were talking about taxonomic trees and phylogenetics and all that stuff, we said that we classified organisms using homologous structures. We classified them using their relationships in DNA and evolution and all that stuff. Well, yes, we do. When we're looking at a new organism, how do we actually classify it onto the tree? Well, we use all those features, but we also use a couple of the central features that are shared by all living things to try to determine where they go. So if you guys remember way back at the beginning of biology, we said biology is a study of life, and we said that there was a difference between abiotic and biotic things. Abiotic things mean things that were never living. They're non-living. So this includes inorganic molecules, such as carbon in the atmosphere. It includes things like rocks and minerals and things that were never alive. And biotic things are all the living parts of an ecosystem. So instead of things like water or air or soil, which would all be considered abiotic, the living things in an environment are going to be like animals and plants and any of the things that are using those abiotic things and organizing them in such a way to be living. We said that the definition of a living organism or a biotic organism was really hard to define, and we said that it was really based off of some key characteristics that they all share. So all biotic things, they all reproduce, they all evolve, they all respond to a stimulus in the environment. They all metabolize or break down food for energy. They all reproduce, they all grow. All of these things are things that are shared in common by all living things. So when we're classifying organisms, yes, we use DNA sequences, and yes, we use homologous structures, but we also look at those central characteristics of living things. We ask, how do they eat? How do they respond to the environment? How do they move? How do they grow? All of these are key questions to ask when we identify new organisms. And you guys know from your lessons last week on classification that we are identifying new species every single year. Sometimes hundreds or thousands of new species are being discovered. And it just goes to show you how diverse this planet really is and how little we actually know about it. So let's go ahead and dive in to how we actually use these systems of classification. Now, last week we talked about the fact that we have a six kingdom system that is organized into three domains. So you guys remember that we had that big breakdown, right? We had the deer king Philip came over for good soup, all those different domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, all that good stuff, right? But so domains are going to be the big boxes or the big categories where we basically can put all organisms. Okay, so these are going to be the largest containers we start with. And the three big domains are eukarya, archaea, and eukarya. And bacteria. Sorry, sorry, bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. So bacteria and archaea, they are the two prokaryotic domains. That means that if you guys don't remember what a prokaryote is, that means that their cells do not have a nucleus. They have DNA, just no nucleus, and they don't have any membrane-bound organelles like the Golgi body or the endoplasmic reticulum or vesicles and things like that. They don't have any of that stuff. They just have DNA and just kind of an open cytoplasm in the inside with some ribosomes floating around. So that's true of bacteria and archaea. Eukarya are going to be eukaryotes, and they have nucleus around their DNA, and they also have membrane-bound organelles. So this is the first big division. All organisms that exist can be put into either the two prokaryotic domains or the one eukaryotic domain. And all organisms can be classified as either bacteria, archaea, or eukaryotes. After we get through the domains, when we break it down, there are 6 kingdoms. 2 of those kingdoms, eubacteria and archaeobacteria, are the 2 prokaryotic kingdoms. So just like there are 2 prokaryotic domains, there are 2 prokaryotic kingdoms, and all bacteria and archaea fit into those 2 kingdoms. The rest of the kingdoms are all part of the eukaryotic domain, meaning that they're multicelled most of the time and that they have a nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. And so that's going to be the Protista, Plantae, Fungi, and Animalia. Those are all the kingdoms that are going to be included in the Eubacteria domain. So basically, these are big boxes. If you imagine, if we were taking all the organisms on Earth and putting them into boxes, these are the boxes that help us to sort them based off of those features we talked about earlier. Okay, so domains are, again, the broadest system of classification. Here are the definitions of the domains that we went over. And we can see here that there's one more distinction that they make, which is that archaea and eubacteria are unicellular. In other words, instead of being a multi-celled organism like we are, our bodies are made up of trillions of cells. Their bodies are made up of one cell, and that one cell moves around the environment and interacts with it. Eukaryotes are typically multicellular, but I will tell you that the Protista, which is the one kingdom in eukarya that are just single-celled, only have that one cell to compose their body. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So archaeans are going to be living in harsh environments. They can survive incredible temperatures, temperatures that would melt metal, they can survive in. Archaeans are, because of this, known as extremophiles. They like to live in extreme places. They can live in sewage treatment plants, thermal vents beneath the surface of the sea. They can live in extremely salty waters that would kill other organisms. So they're pretty incredible. So again, they're unicellular. Their methods of metabolism are many and varied. Oftentimes, though, archaeans do not like oxygen. So typically, they tend to be anaerobic when we talk about their metabolism, and we'll talk about that a little bit in a bit. But archaeans are extremophiles, harsh environments, single-celled. Bacteria or eubacteria, it's the same thing. They can often cause human diseases. They're often considered to be pathogens, but not always. They are present in almost all habitats on the Earth, so they can also survive in extreme environments, but not typically as well as archaeans can. They are single-celled. They do not have a nucleus or membrane-bound organelles, but they are very, very important members of the micro community. So they not only provide a lot of energy to that community, but much of that community is made up of bacteria. When we go beyond the 2 prokaryotic kingdoms, archaeans and eubacteria, we get to the 4 eukaryotic kingdoms, Protista, Fungi, Plantae, and Animalia. The features that define these organisms are going to be ones that are more familiar to us because we typically interact more with the eukaryotic kingdoms than with the prokaryotic ones. So let's go ahead and do some exploration and see what the main features of these guys are. So Protista, most of them are unicellular, which is weird for a eukaryote. Typically, eukaryotes are multicellular organisms, so this sets Protista apart. Some are autotrophic, which means that they make their own food using things like photosynthesis or chemosynthesis, but others could be heterotrophic, meaning that they eat other organisms for their food. So Protista are pretty varied. I will tell you that they're like the most diverse kingdom of eukaryotes. They include many different organisms that some of which, actually many of which, are more related to other kingdoms than they are to themselves. So Protista are a very strange kingdom because they're kind of a part of all 6 kingdoms, or excuse me, all 4 eukaryotic kingdoms. They have relatives in each one, and they're basically kind of the weird redheaded stepchildren that we all kind of like shuttle into this one group, and we're like, we don't really know how to classify you very well, but you're unicellular eukaryotes, so we're just going to put you all together, even though you might not be closely related at all. And so some of these guys are going to be more closely related to plants, some to animals, some to fungi, but they're not going to be very closely related to each other. The one thing they share in common is that most are unicellular, um, though some can be multicellular or colonial, meaning they live together. Okay, fungi are going to be multicellular, like all the other kingdoms we're going to talk about in eukarya. Protista are the only ones that can be unicellular eukaryotes. Fungi are multicellular, I guess except for yeast, sorry, take that back. There's a lot of exceptions here. They they are absorbent heterotrophs, which means that they absorb nutrients from the environment. So instead of ingesting something, so taking something in, food inside their stomach and ingesting it, they spray chemicals on it that help to break it down, enzymes, and then they kind of slurp it up or sort of ingest it using these little root-like things called mycelium. So fungi are external when we talk about their digestion. They just digest things externally from their bodies and then absorb it. Their cell walls are made out of something known as chitin, which interestingly enough is the same compound that helps to make the shells on crabs and other crustaceans. So chitin is a carbohydrate very much like cellulose in plants. And so we know that cellulose makes up the cell walls in plants, chitin makes up the cell walls in fungi, and it's just another rigid structure that helps to protect and give shape to these organisms, just like the cell wall in plants. Plantae is going to be all the plants. They are usually autotrophic, although I will tell you that some plants are not. Not all plants use photosynthesis. Some are actually heterotrophs, and they feed off of other plants. We'll talk about those a little bit later. Most of them absorb sunlight to make glucose and photosynthesis, but not all of them, and their cell walls are made out of cellulose rather than chitin. So it might seem weird to talk about what cell walls are made out of as a distinctive feature, but it is one of the features that we use to classify these organisms. We then get to Animalia, which are going to be multicellular, just like all the other ones except for Protista and a few exceptions in fungi. They're heterotrophs, so animals cannot be autotrophs. They are not chemosynthesizers or photosynthesizers, so they have to rely on eating other organisms for their food. And Animalia is going to be really diverse. It's going to include from like worms and insects all the way up to that lovely fuzzy seal that you see in the birds. So it's going to include all of those things. And we're going to take a look at some of the more definite features of Animalia in a little bit. Okay, so those are the six kingdoms, the four eukaryotic and the two prokaryotic, um, and the three domains we talked about. They're each going to have various specialized features and functions that we're going to look into more with your exploration for this lesson. And they all fit onto the tree of life. So when we talk about the tree of life, there's a single common ancestor to all life, which is what we mentioned in evolution. And that spawned all of these various different organisms. Eubacteria and archaea are going to be these domains here that spawned off first. We think that eubacteria are the oldest. Archaeans came after them, and then all the eukarya developed off the archaeans. The main eukarya includes all of these, and you can see that Protista is going to pop up multiple times within this evolutionary chain, and that's because those protists are basically a mixed bag of organisms that we don't really know how to well define, and so we kind of stick them all in the same group. But you can see some of these protists are going to be more related to plants, some are going to be more related to fungi, and some are actually going to be more related to, or closely related to older prokaryotes like archaeans, rather than being more related to plants or animals. So it's pretty interesting to see the diversity in this tree. Okay, guys, so you're going to go ahead and answer a couple of questions on the general structures of these organisms, and then you guys are going to take a more in-depth exploration and look at how these organisms feed and get their food, how they move, how they grow, all of those different features that I mentioned previously. Hope you guys have an awesome day and are staying safe and well.